Hi, I'm Kath, and this is a series of conversations about things that I think are really important with a bunch of people that I'm inspired by, and I hope you enjoy them as much as I enjoyed having them.
Hello, Talafalava. I am Tommy Misa. I'm a human. My star sign is Taurus. I don't know anything about star signs, but I do have a little Taurus tattoo on the back of my neck that I got in King's Cross when I was drunk once. Dogs. Oh, big dick energy.
Well, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on here.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're an amazing writer, actor, and comedian, most recently writing your own play. Your work often explores things like queerness, gender, and race. You talk about your experience growing up Samoan in Australia. You're also quite the fashion icon, as seen today when you walked in this beautiful get-up.
Yep.
And I'm really stoked to have you here today.
Yeah, you did your research. Thank you. Yeah.
Great.
Happy to be here.
Firstly, I just want to ask, you use the gender-neutral pronouns, they, them, and identify as
Fafafine.
Fafafine there?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for anyone wondering, what does this mean and why is that identity important to you?
Yeah, so Fafafine is a Samoan term that's used for anyone that exists outside of the gender binary, in both in the Samoan Islands but also in the diaspora. It has so many different meanings to so many different people, and it is, I guess, sometimes can be like a bit of an umbrella term. But for me, it's sort of, I guess it means being fluid in my body, fluid in the way that I present, but also, and probably most importantly for me, why I identify as Fafafine and not non-binary, but then use they, them pronouns, it's confusing, is that it has history to it and acknowledgement. So for me, like within Samoan culture, and like my nana knows I'm Fafafine, and for her she's like, okay, so I know what that means for them, and it's about like my role in my community, and a lot of Fafafine people, like presently and historically, have been leaders. So for me, it feels like a gift, and oh my god, I feel like I'm about to cry. It really feels like a power, and it's taken me a long time to arrive at that. I lived in Samoa as a child, and like some of my earliest memories were of my nana and my aunties being like, this child is Fafafine, and dressing me up, and I always wanted to be my auntie Tusi, and so and that was something that I really embraced, and that was so special because it was like they recognized that in me before I ever did, or before I even had the language or knew what any of that meant. It was just like I knew and felt that I was just a child, and then like moved back to Australia, and I was always a really femme kid, and then came out quite young as gay. And then that, I guess, just never really felt right. And then it's kind of taken me a long time to like also now just be like, oh, it's been there all along, and it's in my body, and it's in my culture, and we've existed, and we still exist, and yeah, and it's my power. Yeah.
Well, I would also love to know a little bit about your journey as a performer and a writer. How did that journey begin for you, and what drives your creativity?
So as a young person, I used to perform in a Samoan cultural dance group, and that was my first engagement with performance. But I would say that also was just part of like life and culture and part of growing up. And then I got to high school and I was like, I'm too cool to be, performing, someone performing. And now I look back at it and I'm like, oh, I was such a little shit. But what was I saying? Right, so then there was like this big gap where I didn't do anything and it just became like the biggest drop kick and dropped out of school. And then for, I would say from like 15, 16 to like, how old am I now? 28. So like mid 20, like 22, 23, when I was like completely lost. Like I was honestly so lost, and it felt like there was this huge part of me that was missing. And I remember I had just started studying nutritional medicine. I was going to be like a blogger, health blogger. We had this little convo before.
Yes, we love
the blogger stage. And it was coming up to like the cutoff date to like, if it goes onto your HEX, fee help for anyone who's international. And it was like creeping up and I was like, oh, I don't want this. And it just didn't feel right. And also like biochemistry, I was just like, no, thank you. And and so there was like just something missing. And then I had a dream, right? And in my dream, it was like, you need to be, I just remember this like urge to act. And I woke up the next day and I was just like, it was like this light bulb moment. And I was like, it's been there all along. I need to perform. And so I quit uni and then I like enrolled in acting classes, and that's sort of where it began. And then I moved into writing a couple of years ago out of necessity. I was kind of sick of not working and also not being able to play the things and create the stories that I wanted to create. So I was like, I'll just write them myself. And that has now become my currency. What inspires my creativity is the everyday. I think it's in life. Like this morning I was at Sydney Park, and I go to Sydney Park most mornings and I do my little Pilates class down by the water, and I just watch My Octopus Teacher, which like everyone has probably seen. Yeah. Also, like that's, there's problems to it. Anyway, the story.
Just living that like wellness blogger, just taking a little piece of it,
just taking
doing
a little
the Pilates,
piece.
yeah.
But I've been going down to Sydney Park, and I need to get to the point of the story. There was this little eel that swam up to the edge of the water, and it comes most mornings to the water, and it stares at me, and it sits there. And there's a lot of like Samoan mythology around eels, and I was like, that's a sign. And so now like, every morning I'm like, my eel teacher, like it's just like there. And so I get it from like moments like that, or like this morning, dogs in the park, and there's always like dog drama, because I don't know if you've been to Sydney Park, but like it's like the primo dog park in Sydney. Yeah.
I don't have a dog, sadly.
Neither. But that's why I go to Sydney Park.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
And like, there's always like drama with like, like the dog owners there. There's always like people like talking about what's going on, and like that to me is like creativity. That's like that's sort of like the source that I pull from, is like the everyday and like what seems to be the mundane, but is actually real life. And that's the kind of stories I love, is like seeing just life.
People.
Because it's so like devastating and joyful and messy, and it's so many things, and that sometimes those moments all those moments exist in like 30 seconds. And I'm like, this is a feature film in 30 seconds.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. And you were saying before, like you started writing, obviously sparked through, like you were saying, almost like people watching and everything, but also out of necessity. You were kind of saying that before. Could you elaborate on that just a little bit more?
Yeah. So I started writing out of necessity because there just wasn't work for me, and I had so much drive, and I was like, and I was seeing like my straight white counterparts getting stuff, and I was like, and I wanted to work, so I just started like writing stuff that I was interested in. So I started writing what I wanted to see and what I felt and what I was experiencing, and again it was like just like the mundane stuff of life that to me was like so exciting and funny, and I'm funny, so like I toot my own horn, but
That's good. I love that.
But yeah, and so I just started putting stupid shit up on Instagram, and then like I started doing like sketch stuff for BuzzFeed, sketch comedy stuff for BuzzFeed, and like, you know, going a little bit viral. So, and so I was like, wow, people like this stuff.
This,
They
yeah.
think it's funny, and they relate, and that's cool to me.
On writing your own stuff, you recently wrote a play called They Took Me to a Queer Bar, which you describe as a messy love letter to the people and venues that raised me. The play focuses on queer digital and physical spaces and the erasure of them, as well as the lack of representation in these very same spaces. And I'd love to know what drove you to write this play and why you think it's important that these stories are told.
Yeah. What drove me to write the play was my own life. I've always worked in like bars and clubs, and I've worked in a few gay and queer venues. And I now work at, well, it's closed at the moment, RIP. No, not RIP, it's coming back. Sorry, the Bearded Tit, which is a really fantastic little queer clubhouse in Redfern. And a lot of my friends work in queer performance spaces, and that's also where I get like inspiration and drive from, is by seeing like what I believe to be like some of the best performers in the world I see at 3:00 in the morning on a club stage, and it's something else to perform to a queer audience. It's something else to perform to like an audience that's under the influence of XYZs, and to be able to hold that kind of space is amazing. And that, I think that comes from history. Like, we have so much history within these spaces. So some of the best stuff I've seen is in queer clubs at all hours of the night, and there's so much joy and grief and celebration. And again, it's like it's like these spaces are places that historically were the only safe spaces for a lot of us to exist. And so like within that, like the subcultures of like the LGBTQIA plus existence really get to flourish, and I love them. I just love these spaces. I'm in them all the time. I work in them. My friends are in them. Like, so I wanted to write a play about that. So then the erasure of them, there's so few of them that exist still in Australia, around the world. And that really scares me, because I think it's amazing that we have like queer digital online space. I think that's also really, really important, and is an evolution of queer space. But it's something different. Not saying it's better or worse, but it's something different to be in a physical space with queer bodies, multi-generational, and have like, you know, elders of the community and like the baby queers of the community all existing together, and no one questions like what anyone's role, or like no one questions each other. You're just like, you're here, you're my people, and that's all that matters. So let's fucking dance. That shit just like drives me crazy, and I'm craving being back on a dance floor and being back in a queer space. And so yeah, I wrote this play, and it sort of is set in a fictional queer venue and explores like the gentrification of Sydney's inner suburbs, and the erasure and loss of a lot of the spaces, and also acknowledging people from the past, like Dawn O'Donnell, who was this iconic lesbian elder who basically started Oxford Street. She owned like all the venues, and she was like really badass, and there's like so many like crazy stories about her that I'm obsessed with. And then like women like Carmen Rupe, who was a trans Māori performer who moved to Sydney from Aotearoa in the 50s. And like people like that like we don't hear about women, we don't hear about people of colour and Indigenous bodies within our history. We just hear, because often it's been documented by gay white men, so we hear that part of the story, those stories. So for me, it was about adding to like queer lineage in a performative context, but also like history and archiving, where I'm like, no, these are voices that we need to hear about and that we need to acknowledge. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's now, stay tuned, hopefully going to move on to a different life. Hashtag on the screen. But yeah, that's a process that I'm moving through. But yeah, which was really exciting because I did the season and it was received really well, and I was like, I want this to be accessible also to people outside of the city, and I want people to see it in, little queer kids in country towns who are like, where do I fit?
Yeah.
And it's like, here's these places that exist. And yeah, so accessibility, I think, is an important thing for me, thinking about work moving forward, is making things accessible for everyone. And like accessibility as well, like physical accessibility in terms of like spaces that are accessible, but also accessible in terms of like the language that's used. Because what felt so deterring for me from entering the arts industry was that it felt so elite. And I remember going to like my first play and being like, I don't understand any of the words that are being like presented right now. And that was really sad, because I was like, I want to know what's going on, and I want like a younger version of me, an uneducated younger version of me, to be able to go into a space and understand what's being presented. Because if we're talking about underrepresented communities, it needs to be accessible to them. Otherwise, what's the point if we're just preaching to the choir of people who are also, being like, oh, yes, it's like, I love to be in a space. I did a play last year at Belvoir, which was about Tokelau, which is a small island, a country in the Pacific, which is facing climate change. Like it's really present for them. And a lot of the audience and the show itself was extremely accessible in terms of like the culture that was incorporated in it. And that for me was like a moment where I was like, this is what it means to have work that is accessible to the communities that we're speaking about. And they came, it's a small community in Australia. I think there's maybe like 3,000-4,000 in Sydney. And they came in droves, and they came to the shows, and they would get up and dance with us and sing with us. And like every night, the final scene is me like sacrificing myself to the island and being like, I'm going to stay with the motherland, as the waters came over. And like they would get up and sing with us, and I would be like weeping through the final scene, and I was like, this is what it means to make accessible work, is when the people that you're talking about feel seen and heard, and like truly seen and heard, not just like tokenistic,
like
pick you up, ticking a box, like this is the way that we should tell your story. It's like, no, well, who's watching the story? Yeah.
What is your relationship like with representation in Australia?
My relationship with representation in Australia is complicated. I'd say it's complicated. It's complicated because I'm so hungry to see so much more different stories, and for me, like what I imagine an ideal world would be, I turn on the TV or I go to the theatre, and it's always a new story that it's an experience that I have no idea about, or I've never met someone who is of that lived experience, and like never seeing the same experience twice, because it's like there's 7 billion of us on this world, so like there could be 7 billion different stories. The possibilities are endless. It's also complicated because I acknowledge the privilege that I have of being of a generation that actually isn't even allowed in the room to tell stories and to be represented, and there's privilege in that, because it's like I look at my father's life, and I look at my grandparents' life, and I look at just people who've never been represented, and who are older than me, and they never even got to get in the room, and so like there's this thing of like me really wanting to, like, for things to change so rapidly, but understanding that like in order to have like a robust industry and country, the time needs to be spent to really create stories and properly engage with like representation and what that really truly means. And I also understand as well, like something I think about often is like I'm half white, so I'm a palatable brown body that that also can code switch. I've had the privilege of growing up with a white mother, and so I can code switch and go in and out of queer spaces, POC spaces, white spaces, and sure, sometimes I am seen as, I do face racism or whatever it may be, but I also understand that then there's people that don't have the same privileges as me to be in those spaces because of the privileges that I carry.
What are the stories you feel most compelled to tell? And I mean, kind of touching again, like what do you wish to see more of?
I want to see more queer stories. I want to see more Indigenous-led stories, and I want to see stories about joy. I'm really done with seeing stories about trauma. They're really important. I acknowledge that, but through trauma comes joy and liberation, and I want to see that. I want to see that joy. Joy is like my meditating. The thing I'm focusing on is like joy and gratitude right now. Because joy can come from so many different places, and it's not happiness. It's not like, the pursuit of happiness where it's like, what is that? What is happiness? It's like a fleeting emotion that is like, whoosh, gone. But joy can exist in any moment.
Any moment. In trauma, it can exist.
Yeah. So I want to see, to conclude, I want to see stories of joy.
Well, to end on, I want to know, what's one way you make the first move in your day-to-day life?
So I make the first move for myself. That's something I'm trying to focus on, is like put myself first and make the right choices for me. And so in the moment, like making the first move to be like, this is a situation that feels uncomfortable, that isn't right, that isn't serving me in a way that's elevating or whatever. And so I'm going to make the first move and be like, see my way out of this situation, goodbye. And then secondly, making the first move, I've actually just been trying to like literally make the first move, like, when I'm like in the bar, and I'm sort of always been like that awkward person that's like,
are you usually a waiter? Like you wait?
Yeah.
Or you like?
Or I wait, or I'll have a few drinks, and then I'll be like, Yeah, so making the first move, which has been really fun. It's invigorating.
How has it been invigorating, making the first move?
Well, it's scary. It's really, really scary, but then it's so exciting. And then it's also just like dealing with rejection.
Which is important.
Which is really important, because I love the awkwardness of first moves, of being like, hey, so I like pineapples. Can I get you a drink?
Yeah.
Fun.
I think it's really attractive as well.
So
right?
attractive.
Yeah.
I love awkwardness.
Yeah.
Like I love awkward people, and I'm really drawn to them. And it's really attractive to me. So yeah, be awkward, make moves, buy soda waters if you're not a drinker, Stay safe, kids.